They said if you spoke above a whisper, the trees would answer. Not in words, in tone. In the same rhythm, the same trembling pitch. The year was 1981, and the jungle outside Puerto Inambari, in the high forests of southern Peru, was still marked by landslides from the last rainy season. The air there never settled. It clung to skin, heavy and green, dense with the smell of wet wood and copper soil. To reach the village, one had to cross a bridge of warped boards that moaned under each step. The sound vanished almost immediately, absorbed by the foliage. No echo, only silence shaped by humidity. The villagers called the forest El Recuerdo, the memory. They said the air could repeat what it had heard if it wished to. Hunters would find themselves surrounded by voices they recognized, calling from deep within the trees. Names of the dead, sometimes. Orders they'd given days earlier. No one went in alone after dusk. In August of that year, Dr. Esteban Varela, a field linguist from Lima, arrived with 2 students and a single tape recorder. He had come to study a recently discovered dialect of the Harakambut people, a language said to contain sounds that imitated birds, rain, and even footsteps. But he was drawn to something else. In one of the few recorded testimonies from that period, he said, "They speak of words that do not die, sounds that stay, circling. I came to hear them." His team set up camp near the riverbank, just beyond the village. The forest rose around them like a wall, leaves dark and glossy, dripping endlessly. Their tent lights cast thin cones through the mist. The air was so thick that sound seemed to move slower. On the second night, while cataloging phonetic samples, Esteban noticed an anomaly in his recordings. A faint second voice, delayed by less than a second, repeating his own words. He replayed the tape. When he said agua, the echo responded faintly. Agua. Same pitch, same breath. He checked for mechanical feedback. The recorder was clean. He looked toward the tree line. No movement, no wind. At dawn, he mentioned it to one of the students, Lucia, who laughed nervously. "Maybe the forest wants to help you translate." But that afternoon, while recording ambient sounds, she heard her own voice whispering her name back from the canopy. She turned the microphone toward the source. A tangle of vines, motionless. The playback captured it clearly. A faint, breathy whisper, one syllable, perfectly hers. By evening, the entire team had grown uneasy. Even the insects seemed to avoid the clearing around their tents. When night fell, the jungle grew unnaturally quiet. No frogs, no birds. Only the sound of rain hitting leaves that never bent under its weight. Around midnight, Esteban woke to what he first thought was wind. Then he realized it wasn't moving air. It was breath. Soft, deliberate inhalations drawn from the darkness around the tent. He whispered, "Lucia." The sound stopped. Then came his own whisper, repeated, low and exact, from somewhere beyond the canvas. "Lucia." He froze. His hand reached for the tape recorder. The red light was on. The reels spun silently. Though he hadn't pressed record, he stepped outside. The fog was dense, crawling across the ground. The forest loomed black and heavy, every trunk slick with dew. He stood still, breathing slowly, until he heard it again. His voice, distant this time, carried from deep among the trees. He followed it. Each repetition came from farther away, the words thinning as if spoken through water. The sound led him to the riverbank, where the reflection of the moon barely cut through the mist. There, something in the dark exhaled. A long, low breath that stirred the reeds. Then, silence. He returned to camp without a word. In the morning, his recorder held a new tape. No one remembered placing it there. The label read only Field Session 4, Voices. When they played it, the sound was faint, distant, rustling leaves, droplets, wind. Then, beneath it, human speech. Not theirs. A low voice, male, repeating a single word. Vuelve. Come back. It played 3 times before the tape warped, stretched, and snapped. Esteban stared at the broken reel in his hands for a long time. Then he whispered, almost to himself, "It remembers." And from somewhere far beyond the tree line, the forest whispered the same words back. By the 4th day, the camp had begun to unravel quietly, like something alive beginning to molt. The equipment no longer behaved as it should. batteries drained within hours. Even when unplugged, the tape reels warped despite the dry box. At night, the fog grew thicker and the ground stayed warm, soft, almost pulsing underfoot. Lucia refused to sleep alone. She moved her cot beside Esteban's and began keeping a notebook of sounds she heard when the others slept. The pages filled fast. Short notes, fragments, question marks. Soft whistling near tent, not wind. Repeating syllables, possibly mine. 2 distinct female tones, low range. On the 5th night, she woke suddenly to find the lamp still burning. Esteban was gone. The forest outside shimmered with mist, and though she could not see movement, the air itself seemed to shift. She called his name once, then twice. Both times the sound returned, slightly delayed, perfectly mirrored. Her throat tightened. She turned back toward the tents, heart pounding, but there, beside the lantern, sat the tape recorder. The reels spun freely. From the speaker came Esteban's voice. "Lucia," he said, calm, measured, close. Then, after a pause, his voice again, distant, distorted, repeating the same word, the same tone, as though mocking him. She unplugged the machine. It kept playing. Her scream broke the quiet, but the echo didn't carry. It folded in on itself, as though the air swallowed it whole. By dawn, Esteban returned, covered in mud from the waist down, his face blank, his breathing slow and even. He said he had walked the riverbank to clear his mind. No one believed him. His boots were clean. He avoided questions, spent the morning sitting by the recorder, writing small notes on scraps of paper. Lucia read one later when he wasn't looking. It said, "The forest repeats until it understands." At noon, the team began packing. The student named Arevalo argued they should leave immediately. The rains were returning. Esteban agreed half-heartedly but insisted they make one last recording before they left. He placed the microphone on a stump at the edge of the forest, pressed record, and waited. Nothing, only the sound of water dripping from the canopy. After 20 minutes, he stopped the reel and rewound it. Playback began normally. The ambient hum of insects, the rustle of leaves. Then, faintly, a whisper. Not human speech, not quite. A layering of syllables that sounded like words collapsing in on each other. It grew louder, more coherent, and then, unmistakably, his own voice spoke through the static. "Don't leave yet!" Arevalo yanked the plug, furious, accusing him of a trick, but Esteban only stared, pale and sweating, shaking his head. That night, the river rose quickly. The storm rolled in with no warning, lightning crawling sideways across the horizon. The tents collapsed under the rain. They huddled together under a tarp, waiting for dawn, the sound of the storm deafening. At some point, through the roar of water and wind, Lucia heard something different. The storm repeating itself, perfectly, but half a second delayed, as if another storm were forming beneath the first. Every sound, every drop, every gust returned in reverse. When it stopped, the silence was worse. The jungle had no night insects anymore. No frogs, no birds, nothing alive that dared make sound. The next morning, Arevalo was gone. His sleeping mat lay soaked beside the river, his bag untouched. They searched until noon. Then they heard him, or what they thought was him, calling from the forest. "Here," the voice said. "Over here." It was calm, steady, familiar. They followed it. Each time they called back, it answered from farther away. The voice never sounded strained, never out of breath, just steady, guiding, almost kind. After an hour, the sound split in two. One voice ahead, one behind. Both identical. Lucia froze. "Esteban, that's not him." He turned slowly, eyes unfocused, listening. "Then what is it?" The forest answered softly from every direction at once. "You." That was when the trees began to move, not bending in the wind. There was no wind, but shifting inward, roots drawing tighter, leaves trembling in a wave that rippled through the canopy. The sound rose low and guttural, like 1,000 lungs exhaling through wood. Lucia fell to her knees, covering her ears. The air vibrated so violently that her teeth ached. Esteban grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the clearing. Behind them, the voice, now deeper, slower, called again. "Come back!" They ran until the sound faded. When they reached the tents, everything was gone. The equipment, Their notes, even the footprints they'd left the day before, erased by the rain or by something else. Only one thing remained: the tape recorder, half buried in the mud, reels spinning without tape. Lucia turned it off. The machine clicked softly, breathing once before it died. Then, from deep in the forest, the echo came again, a whisper, distant but distinct. Her own voice, saying his name. They left the next morning under a gray sky that looked more like ash than cloud. The jungle had gone quiet again, not the natural calm of dawn, but a suspension, a pause that felt deliberate. Even the sound of their footsteps seemed to die mid-air. Lucia walked behind Esteban, her backpack half open, the tape recorder strapped to her chest like something alive she didn't trust to stay still. Each step sank an inch into the damp soil. The smell of rot and rain hung thick, metallic, the way it does inside a wound that refuses to close. They didn't speak until midday. When they finally reached the river, the water was low, moving sluggishly, its surface almost black. The air pressed against them. Esteban stopped walking and looked toward the opposite bank. "Do you hear that?" he asked. Lucia shook her head. "Listen." She held her breath. At first, there was nothing, just the soft hum of heat and insects, distant thunder. Then, faintly, she heard it. A low, repeating murmur, like someone speaking just below the water's surface. It wasn't a language, not exactly. It was rhythm. 3 beats. Pause. 2. Pause. 3 again. It was the same cadence Esteban used when he catalogued phonetic samples. He took a step closer to the edge, crouching, his hand hovering above the water. "It's memory," he whispered. "Sound doesn't vanish here. It sinks." She grabbed his wrist. "Stop." But the water moved differently now. Not flowing, but pulsing outward from where he stood. Each pulse matched his breath. He stepped back, face pale. "It's repeating me." The ripples slowed. Then, faintly, they both heard it. His voice, low and submerged, rising with the bubbles. "Lucia!" She stumbled backward. "We're leaving." He didn't argue. They followed the river downstream until the trees began to thin. The sun never broke through, but the air brightened slightly. A false relief. When they reached the old suspension bridge that marked the edge of the settlement, they stopped again. The boards creaked as they stepped onto it. Halfway across, Esteban froze. "Look," he said. On the far side, standing at the path's entrance, was Arevalo. He was soaked, motionless, eyes unfocused. His lips were pale but curved slightly upward, as if waiting to speak. Lucia gasped and ran toward him. Esteban shouted for her to stop, but she didn't. When she reached the end of the bridge, she reached out to touch his shoulder. He wasn't solid. Her hand passed through mist. The air bent slightly, rippling as though disturbed water were holding a shape it didn't want to release. The figure shimmered, blurred, then dissolved. She stumbled back, clutching the railing. Her pulse hammered in her throat. The air around her buzzed faintly, an electrical hum like a coil warming. Esteban crossed slowly, face ashen. "It's copying him," he said quietly. From the forest behind them came a sound, the unmistakable crack of a branch, followed by the whisper of leaves moving in a pattern too rhythmic to be random. Then, faintly, Arevalo's voice again, deeper this time, echoing from the tree line. "Don't forget me." It wasn't pleading. It was a statement. They turned and ran, not stopping until they reached the outskirts of the village. When they arrived, the villagers stood waiting, silent. None approached them. An old woman finally spoke. "You shouldn't have answered." Lucia dropped the recorder at her feet. Mud clung to its casing, but the reels inside still turned, slow, empty. The woman bent down and listened. The faintest whisper leaked from the speaker, the same repeating rhythm they'd heard at the river. The villagers crossed themselves and backed away. One man muttered something about el recuerdo que aprende, the memory that learns. That night, they stayed in the hut of a fisherman who offered them food and dry clothes. The rain started again, soft but endless. Lucia lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Each droplet on the roof seemed to land in perfect rhythm, the same pattern as before. 3, 2, 3. She covered her ears. The sound continued beneath the wood, beneath her skin. At some point before dawn, she realized the pattern wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from her. Every breath, every heartbeat, every tremor matched the rhythm exactly. When she looked toward Esteban, asleep beside the wall, his chest rose and fell the same way, perfectly synchronized, as if the forest had retuned their bodies to its own slow breathing. Outside, the rain thinned for a moment. In the pause between drops, she heard voices moving through the trees. They weren't echoes anymore. They were speaking. The next day, the sky remained low and colorless, the air swollen with the smell of wet clay and something faintly metallic, not blood, but close. The fisherman who had given them shelter refused to meet their eyes. He left before sunrise, leaving a bowl of boiled plantains and a single line scratched in charcoal on the table. "Do not record it again." Lucia stared at the words for a long time before wiping them away. She didn't need the reminder. The tape recorder now sat silent inside her pack, wrapped in a torn shirt. Even turned off, she swore she could hear it hum softly, as though remembering a rhythm it no longer needed power to repeat. Esteban seemed distant, hollowed out. He spoke less, moved slower. He kept his hands clasped tightly when he walked, as though afraid something might slip out if he didn't. Every few minutes, he tilted his head slightly, listening for sounds she couldn't hear. They left the village by boat. The old engine coughed dark smoke into the morning fog as they drifted downriver toward the main road that led to the city. For the first hour, the water was calm. Then, without warning, the motor sputtered and died. The silence that followed was not natural. It was total. No birds, no insects, no rippling of water against the hull. Lucia turned to speak, but her voice didn't come out. She tried again. Nothing. The air inside her chest moved, but no sound followed. Esteban's eyes widened. He mouthed something, but she couldn't hear it. The forest on both sides of the river began to shimmer, faintly, as though heat waves rose from the leaves. Then, one by one, the sounds returned. Not theirs, but imitations. A cough, a laugh, footsteps against wood, each perfectly timed, perfectly wrong. It was like the forest was trying to remember how to be alive. Then, faintly, from somewhere deep among the trees, a voice emerged. Slow, calm, familiar. Lucia, her own. It was unmistakable. The inflection, the breath, the small quiver in the vowels. Then, another voice. Esteban's, overlapping hers. Lucia. Two voices, then four, then six, repeating, echoing, layering until they couldn't tell where the real ones ended. Esteban clutched his ears, shaking his head violently. He shouted something she couldn't hear. The air shimmered again, and for a brief second, all sound inverted. A sucking inward, like the entire world had exhaled wrong. When it released, the river was gone. They were standing on solid ground, surrounded by trees. The boat, the water, the oars, all vanished. The forest stretched in every direction, perfectly symmetrical, endless. Lucia staggered forward, heart pounding. "This isn't real." "It's remembering," Esteban said quietly. "It's building from what it heard." The trunks around them pulsed faintly. A slow, breathing motion. Beneath the moss, shapes moved. Outlines of roots twisting upward, forming ridges like ribs. She whispered, "It's alive." "No," he said, voice trembling. "It's aware." They began walking, hoping for any break in the trees, but every direction looked the same. Time thinned. Minutes stretched into something slower. Even their shadows lagged behind their steps. Then, faintly, a sound. The soft whir of tape. Lucia froze. She unzipped her pack. The recorder inside had turned itself on. The reels spun slowly, without tape. She reached for it, but Esteban caught her wrist. "Don't." The reels stopped. Then a voice crackled through the empty machine. "Leave it here." Her breath caught. "That's my voice." "I know. Leave it here," it repeated. The air vibrated around them. The trees bent slightly inward, leaves trembling. The sound deepened until it became physical, a pressure against their chests. Esteban reached into the pack, pulled out the recorder, and set it on the ground. The soil beneath it moved, rising slightly, folding over the edges until the machine sank halfway into the earth. The voice spoke one last time, quieter now. "Thank you." Then silence. The forest straightened, the air cooled. For the first time in days, they heard the real wind, faint but natural. Esteban fell to his knees, trembling, his face wet. "It's done," he whispered. "It let us go." Lucia didn't answer. She stared at the space where the recorder had been. The soil there had smoothed completely, no trace of movement. Then, from deep inside the forest, a faint sound rose again, a chorus of whispers, countless voices repeating the same single phrase in unison. "We remember." The wind carried it outward, bending the branches above them. They didn't speak for the rest of the day. When they finally emerged from the tree line at dusk, the sun hit their faces for the first time in a week. Neither of them turned around. The road out of Inambari was rough, carved from red soil and rock that never fully dried. Every few meters, the truck's tires slid, catching on wet clay. Lucia sat in the back with her knees drawn up, watching the tree line recede through the dust-covered window. The jungle blurred into a single dark wall, not green anymore, but black, the color of memory before it's recalled. Esteban sat beside the driver, silent. His hands rested on his knees, motionless, as though holding invisible weight. From time to time, he pressed his thumb to his temple, murmuring short notes under his breath. Lucia thought he was praying until she caught the rhythm of his words. He was repeating the breathing pattern, 3, 2, 3, again and again. By the time they reached the small airstrip near Quince-Mill, the sun had already dropped behind the mountains. The pilot, a man with a cigarette that never left his mouth, glanced at them once and said nothing. The flight back to Lima took 2 hours. Neither of them spoke. When they landed, Esteban went directly to the institute. His clothes were still damp from the forest, but he walked straight into the archive room and began sorting through old reels of magnetic tape. The attendant on duty later said he worked in total silence, never once asking for assistance. Lucia followed him in, but didn't interrupt. She watched him line the reels across the table, labeling them with dates, even though none contained recordings. At last, he picked up one empty reel and stared through its center hole. "They listen," he said softly. "They just need something to hold the sound." She didn't answer. Her ears still rang faintly from the vibration of that final whisper. Over the next few weeks, Esteban began to deteriorate quietly. His lectures grew disorganized. His sentences trailed off. He started carrying a small wooden box wherever he went, claiming it helped him keep silence contained. Lucia tried to see him twice, but his secretary said he'd left for fieldwork. No one knew where. Then, one night, a parcel arrived at her apartment. No return address. Inside was the same box. It was warm to the touch. Inside lay a single reel of tape. No label, no case. She hesitated for hours before playing it. The first sound was rain, soft, rhythmic. Then, beneath it, breathing. A man's at first, steady, slow. Then a woman's, layered with his, perfectly synchronized. Her stomach tightened. She reached for the stop button, but before she could press it, the voices began to speak. One whispering, one repeating. "Lucia, Lucia," her own name in perfect harmony. Then, faintly, laughter. Hers again, and Esteban's. She froze. She hadn't laughed once in that forest. The tape continued. The laughter slowed, lowering in pitch until it became something else. A vibration, a hum that blended with the rain, forming a single, endless note. She pressed stop. The tape didn't stop. The reels kept turning, slower, as if winding themselves backward. The rain on the tape faded. Now it was another sound, the faint crackle of fire. Then, beneath it, voices again. Many this time. Men, women, children. Some spoke clearly. Some whispered over each other. They were saying words in no single language. Fragments of Harakambut, Spanish, Quechua, and something older, softer, that seemed to bypass the ear and settle directly behind the eyes. The rhythm was unmistakable. 3, 2, 3. She hit the power switch. The recorder clicked. Silence. But the reels kept moving. She yanked the plug from the wall. The reels spun faster. The sound filled the apartment. Not through the speaker, but through the air itself, vibrating the window glass, shaking the table. Her teacup rattled, then burst, shards scattering across the floor. The hum deepened, and then, suddenly, all stopped. The reels froze mid-spin. The air thinned, cooling instantly. In the silence that followed, she heard a single breath. Not hers. It came from the direction of the tape. Then a voice, faint, male, calm. "We're still listening." The power light flickered once, then died. Lucia sat still for nearly an hour, not daring to move. When she finally lifted the lid to the recorder, the reel inside was gone. Only the metal spools remained, their edges faintly damp, smelling of wet earth. That night, she dreamt she was back in the forest. The air was so heavy it bent the light. Voices filled the space around her, whispering, merging, until they became one long breath that carried her own voice within it. When she woke, her apartment was completely quiet. Too quiet. She turned on the radio. The static pulsed 3 times, paused, then twice, then faintly. Through the white noise, her own voice spoke. It remembers. By September, the rains had returned to the highlands, turning every street in Lima into a shallow stream that carried the scent of dust and gasoline. The air was heavy, the sky the color of stone. Lucia stopped leaving her apartment. She closed the shutters, unplugged every radio, and sealed the ventilation grates with cloth. Even silence felt like an open wound now. Too exposed, too ready to receive sound that didn't belong. She tried to burn the wooden box Esteban had sent her. The flames rose bright, almost blue, but the box would not catch. The wood blackened, then returned to its color as if the fire had only passed through smoke. When she touched it afterward, it was still warm, days blurred. The ringing in her ears never left. It wasn't a constant tone anymore, but an irregular pulse. 3, 2, 3, always in perfect tempo with her heartbeat. When she pressed her palms over her ears, she could still feel it, vibrating deep inside her skull, like something small and alive trying to find a way out. One evening, as thunder rolled over the city, she found herself sitting at her table with the recorder in front of her again. She didn't remember taking it out. The plug lay coiled beside it, untouched. Yet the reels began to move slowly, turning without resistance, without power. Her name emerged from the static, faint but distinct. Lucia! She froze. The second voice came a moment later. Esteban! Her chest tightened. No, she whispered. You're not real. The voices continued. Lucia! Esteban! Each time softer, more layered, until they overlapped, forming a low, droning harmony that began to rise and fall like breath. She covered the machine with a towel. The sound didn't stop. It vibrated through the table, through the floor, through the air itself. When the lights flickered, she stood, heart hammering, and unplugged the refrigerator. The hum of the building's generator faded. The city outside went dark. Still, the voice continued, now whispering not words, but intonations, patterns of tone that mimicked the rhythm of speech without forming any language she knew. She backed toward the window. The glass trembled slightly with every pulse of sound. She could feel it in her bones. Then she heard another voice, quieter, closer, inside the room, her own. It came from behind her, repeating something she hadn't said. Don't look. The sound was perfectly calm. She turned anyway. The towel over the recorder had lifted, suspended as if held by invisible hands. Beneath it, the reels spun backward. The spools blurred, forming circles of light. From within the hum, faint images began to emerge. Not on the machine, but in the air just above it. Leaves, branches, light dripping through a canopy of green so dense it had no sky. She stumbled back, hitting the wall. The smell of wet soil filled the apartment, heavy and sweet. The air thickened. The room darkened until only the faint green shimmer remained, casting shadows like vines along the floor. Then, from the depths of the static, she heard Esteban's voice clearly, not recorded. Present. You shouldn't have taken it home. Her mouth went dry. What did you do? It needs silence, he said. That's all it remembers. The reels stopped abruptly. The air went still. The light vanished, leaving only darkness and the faint scent of rain. Lucia's knees gave out. She sat on the floor, shaking, waiting for something else to happen. Nothing did. When she finally looked again, the recorder was gone. The table was empty, dust undisturbed. Only the wooden box remained. Its lid was open. Inside was a single folded piece of paper, damp with condensation. She unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was hers. The forest doesn't echo. It keeps. Her throat closed. She read the line again. The ink bled slightly, as if still wet. Then, faintly, from somewhere deep in the building, came a sound, a voice, low, distorted, muffled through walls. Lucia. She pressed her hand against the door. The sound came again, closer. Lucia, each time softer, but nearer until it was right beside her ear. We're still here. She stepped back, eyes wide, breath trembling. The walls around her seemed to exhale, expanding slightly before settling again. She didn't sleep that night. By morning, the apartment smelled of wet wood. The floors were damp, and from somewhere below, faint but distinct, came the soft whir of tape turning. When the neighbors finally noticed that Lucia's lights hadn't gone out in 3 days, they called the landlord. He knocked once, twice, then entered. The air inside her apartment was cold, damp, too damp for Lima. He described the smell later as like dirt after rain, but wrong somehow. Sour, heavy. The furniture was untouched, but every wall bore faint dark streaks that ran vertically from ceiling to floor. At first, they thought it was mold, but when sunlight hit them, the streaks shimmered, faintly green. Lucia wasn't there. What they did find was strange. Her tape recorder, sitting neatly on the kitchen table, unplugged, perfectly clean. The reels were still. Inside, a new tape, hand-labeled in precise handwriting. Field Session 5, continuation. No one dared play it. The police sealed it with her other belongings and filed the case as missing, presumed fled. Weeks later, one of the officers, a young man named Salazar, took the tape home. Curiosity outweighed sense. He didn't tell anyone. That night, he waited until his wife was asleep and sat alone at the dining table with the recorder. The air felt heavier as he turned the reels. The first minute was blank, faint static, light crackling. Then a man's voice, distant but clear. "Lucia!" Salazar frowned. It wasn't loud, but it came from close to the microphone. Then came another voice, female, quieter, as if behind the man. "Don't." Then silence. He leaned closer, replayed the same few seconds. The background hiss seemed to pulse, like breathing. He increased the volume. At 3 minutes in, something new emerged. Faint rustling, branches moving, a single drop of water falling near the microphone. Then, unmistakably, words. Not in Spanish, not in any language he recognized. But the intonation was wrong for nature. It had rhythm, structure, like something imitating speech. He pressed stop, heart racing. From the corner of the room came a faint echo. The same phrase exactly, as if the air had learned it. He spun in his chair. Nothing. The curtains didn't move. The house was still. He pressed play again. The sound continued. Then, his name. "Salazar," whispered once. Then again, louder, coming from the machine and the room at the same time. He switched off the recorder. The reels didn't stop. The breath on the tape grew louder, wet, human. He ripped the plug from the wall. The reels kept turning. Then, abruptly, everything went silent. For 5 seconds, the room was empty of sound. Then a single tone rose from the recorder, pure and low, lasting exactly 10 seconds. When it faded, he heard voices, dozens, maybe hundreds, layered into a single murmur. They weren't speaking words anymore, they were breathing. The apartment grew cold, his breath fogged in the air. He reached to open the recorder, to pull the tape free, but his hand froze. A reflection stared back at him in the black metal surface. Not his face, but a forest canopy, swaying slightly, as though the device had turned into a window. He pulled away, terrified, but the reflection didn't vanish. It deepened. Behind the canopy, something moved. Human shapes, faint, translucent, their mouths open but silent. He slammed the machine shut, grabbed it, and threw it out the window. The glass shattered. The sound stopped instantly. When he leaned out, the recorder was gone. The street below was empty. He stood there for a long time, chest heaving, listening. The wind through the alley sounded almost like voices carried far away. He tried to tell himself it was the city, cars, radios, anything. But later that night, when he turned off the lights, he heard the same tone again, low, steady, coming from inside his own chest. 10 seconds, then 10 more. He didn't sleep. The next morning, his wife found the windows wet, as if it had rained inside. The footprints near the table led nowhere, stopping abruptly at the chair where he'd been sitting. When investigators arrived, they noted that the apartment was silent. Not unusually quiet. Silent. No sound of traffic from outside. No hum from the lamps. not even the buzz of the refrigerator. The sound meter they brought registered nothing. Just before leaving, one of the technicians placed the microphone against the wall to check the wiring. The needle twitched once, barely, then began moving on its own, rhythmic, steady, precise. 3, 2, 3. It continued for exactly 2 minutes before flattening again. They left the equipment there, recording. Later, when the tape was played back at the station, the first 20 seconds were blank. Then, faintly, over the static, came a whisper. "We remember." The same phrase, repeated 3 times. "We remember, we remember, we remember." And beneath it, so soft it almost disappeared, the sound of rain on leaves that never ended. The official report on Officer Salazar's disappearance was only 2 pages long. Unexplained absence following incident with seized evidence. Personal effects intact. No signs of struggle. It was the 4th such report connected to the case. By the end of the year, no one at the precinct mentioned El Caso de la Grabadora. The file was quietly archived under equipment malfunction. But something lingered. The technicians who'd handled the audio noticed odd interference in other recordings. Every reel taken in the weeks after Salazar vanished contained faint rhythmic distortion, even when the tape was blank. When amplified, the pattern was unmistakable. 3 pulses, pause, 2 pulses, pause, 3 again. A sound engineer from Lima University, Professor Guillermo Andrade, requested access to the tapes for study. He believed the anomaly to be electromagnetic, a resonance caused by flawed grounding. He took the reels to his lab and vanished within the month. His assistant, a postgraduate student named Ana Cueto, was the last to see him. She later recounted what happened that night. He said he was hearing modulation that didn't belong. The pulse was carrying structure, like language without vowels. He told me to stay in the hallway. I didn't listen. When she entered the lab, the lights were flickering at a steady interval. 10 seconds on, 10 off. The reel-to-reel machine was spinning backward. Andrade stood in front of it, completely still, eyes open, listening. On the wall behind him, projected from the reflection of the reel's light, was the faint outline of trees. Not drawn, but moving. She said she heard a low sound then. Not a voice, but breathing. Dozens of layers, slow and synchronized, filling the entire room. Andrade whispered, "They found a way to stay." The power cut out. When the lights returned, he was gone. The tape on the machine was still moving. She pulled it out, threw it in a drawer, and sealed it. She left the lab that night and never returned. Months later, the janitor found the tape discarded in a waste bin. He sold it to a street vendor who collected scrap film. The vendor used it to repair a cheap cassette for a radio broadcast. On February 14, 1982, that cassette aired by accident on a local AM station in Madre de Dios. The announcer, unaware, left it running during a segment break. For 47 seconds, listeners across the region heard a sound described as rain recorded inside a cave. But it wasn't rain, it was rhythm, breathing. The broadcast was pulled immediately, but calls flooded the station. Dozens of people claiming they recognized the voices. "That's my brother. That's my wife. They're saying my name." The signal had spread beyond the town. Radios as far as Puno caught faint static interference, a low repeating hum that modulated like whispered speech. For weeks, the complaints continued. Radios picked up phantom transmissions at random hours. Soft, irregular, but all following the same pattern. 3, 2, 3. A technician from Cusco later isolated a phrase embedded deep within the modulation. When slowed by half, it formed clear speech. "We kept what you left behind." The technician destroyed the tape that night. But by then, the sound had already traveled too far. The forests surrounding Puerto Inambari began reporting strange phenomena. Hunters claimed the echoes returned before they spoke. Trees swayed without wind. Birds repeated human calls with eerie precision. Villagers refused to enter the jungle after dusk. One account from April described voices rising from the canopy during heavy rain, 1,000 whispers forming one long breath that vibrated the ground. The local priest called it an infection of sound. He left his parish within the week. And somewhere near the old riverbend, a group of loggers found a rusted tape recorder half buried in the mud. It was still warm. When one of them pressed play, the machine emitted a low hum. 3 pulses, 2, 3. then silence. The next day, every bird within a kilometer fell quiet. That night, when the wind moved through the trees, the leaves didn't rustle. They spoke. Not words, not even whispers, but tones. Soft, rhythmic, breathing tones. The pattern was the same. 3, 2, 3. And in that sound, if one listened long enough, there was something else. A woman's voice, faint, repeating the same line over and over, like a prayer whispered too many times to be forgotten. It remembers. By 1984, the stories had already grown into something else. Half folklore, half warning. Truck drivers crossing the Inambari Valley would lower their radios to static when passing through the lowlands, saying the air spoke back if you made too much noise. Fishermen in the tributaries kept their nets silent, letting them drift without the usual callouts between boats. Even the Air Force stopped low-altitude flights over the jungle that season. The region was no longer called El Recuerdo by locals. They called it La Voz. Satellite images from that year show something strange in the valley. A mist formation that persisted for 8 consecutive days, unmoving despite strong winds reported around it. The data logs describe it clinically: dense vapor with unknown particulate reflective behavior. But one entry from a technician named Campos stands out. Written in the margin of the weather report, it reads, "Audio interference on all transmission bands. Sound pattern identical to earlier archive anomaly, 3.2.3. Unconfirmed source located at approximate coordinates of prior research camp." That camp, of course, had never been officially recorded. A few weeks later, Campos disappeared. The last radio contact from his team came during a nighttime survey flight. The pilot reported the sound of whispering through the cockpit headset, overlapping with the hum of the engine. The transmission log cut mid-sentence. No wreckage was ever found. The Peruvian Ministry of Environment issued an internal memo soon after. The message, later declassified, was brief. Suspend all acoustic studies in the Inambari region. Avoid documentation or press dissemination. Maintain silence. That was the last government record connected to the phenomenon. But the silence didn't last. In 1988, a German ethnographer named Marta Gruber arrived in Cusco, tracing stories of a talking forest recorded in Andean oral histories. She had heard about Esteban Varela, the linguist who vanished years earlier, and claimed to have found fragments of his early notes preserved in a private library. Among them was a single sheet written in careful, deliberate handwriting. It contained only one sentence: "Sound is not memory. Memory is sound that refuses to end." She traveled south with 2 local guides. They followed the river route used decades earlier, carrying lightweight recording and reels wrapped in oilcloth. The villagers they questioned refused to help. One elder told them bluntly, "The forest knows you're coming before you." They laughed. But 2 nights later, as they camped near the edge of the old landslide valley, the jungle fell. The air grew heavy, not still, but expectant, like a held breath. Marta set a microphone outside the tent. For hours, it recorded only insects and rain. Then, at 2:37 a.m., the insects stopped. The tape captured a faint, low hum. The same pulse pattern. 3, 2, 3. Then a voice. Male, hoarse, barely above a whisper. Marta. The sound of her own name. When she played it back at dawn, her guides begged her to leave it. They refused to carry the recorder, but she took it with her anyway. 2 days later, she was seen walking alone through a nearby village, eyes blank, clothes soaked. She didn't speak. The tape was recovered months later by missionaries passing through. When played, the first sound was silence, then breathing, and under that breath, faint but distinct, the word vuelve, come back. It was the same phrase that had been heard on Esteban's Lost Field Session 4. The missionaries burned the tape, but one of them, a young novice, claimed he still heard it in his sleep. That same cadence, repeating, always in rhythm with his heart. 3, 2, 3. By the early 1990s, the forest near Puerto Inambari was completely abandoned. Maps stopped marking trails through it. The few aerial images taken after that show nothing but canopy. Thick, unbroken, infinite. Yet deep within the dense green, hidden by foliage, the shape of the land had changed. Satellite scans revealed a series of small, rectangular clearings, precise, deliberate, unnatural. When analyzed, the clearings formed a spiral. At its center, a single clearing remained empty, about the size of a small camp. Acoustic models later ran simulations using topographical data from those coordinates. The shape, if subjected to sound, produced a repeating echo pattern. 3, 2, 3. That's when the archive researchers stopped running the models. In the final note of the report, an analyst wrote in pencil along the bottom margin, "It's not repeating, it's responding. There are no official records after 1992. No more expeditions, no field notes, no tapes, only fragments. One fragment belongs to the Instituto Nacional de Antropología in Lima, a blurred photograph developed from an undeclared roll. The image shows a river bend half hidden by mist, taken from the air. In the center of the frame, a dark shape cuts through the fog. Not a shadow, not a tree. A perfect circle of clear air. A ring of silence. The technician who developed it wrote a single annotation on the back. Static during exposure. Heartbeat rhythm detected in audio strip. The photograph was never archived. The second fragment is a letter, dated 2004, from an unnamed researcher stationed in Pucallpa. It was found among unclassified environmental reports. The ink is uneven, the paper warped from humidity. The final lines read, "At night, the forest hums like a body half asleep. The recorders pick it up even when unplugged. Last night, I heard my own voice outside the tent. I'm certain of it. It didn't ask for help. It only said my name, once, slowly, carefully, as if testing whether I'd remember. No follow-up correspondence exists." The third and final fragment is not on paper. It's a sound file, anonymous, unlabeled, circulating in archives since 2015 under the designation Inambari Unknown.wav. Its waveform is uneven, breathing-shaped. For the first minute, there's nothing but low static. Then, slowly, a pulse emerges. 3 beats. Pause. 2. Pause. 3 again. The sound grows softer, almost human. Then comes a faint voice. One female speaking through distance and water. Esteban. A pause, then a reply, male, almost tender. Lucia. The two names loop, merging until they become unrecognizable, dissolving into the sound of wind through leaves, the low rhythm of rain on hollow wood, the breath of earth remembering. At the end of the file, after 12 minutes of near silence, there's one final whisper. A voice. Calm, close, ancient. We never stopped listening. And then, nothing. Except if you play it loud enough, beneath the quiet, you can still hear it. A faint echo, not delayed, but aligned perfectly with your own breath, as though something vast and patient were breathing with you. It holds for 3 seconds, pauses for 2, then breathes again. 3, 2, 3. And in that rhythm, if you listen long enough, you begin to realize the forest never stopped. It only changed its language. It remembered every sound it was ever given, every voice, every breath, every plea to be left alone, and in its endless patience, it waits for the next sound to keep. Because somewhere deep beneath the canopy, where no one walks anymore, the soil still trembles faintly at night, the roots still move when the wind is gone, and the air still carries the same slow heartbeat of rain that fell decades ago. If you stand there long enough, you'll hear it breathe your name, softly, gently, testing whether you'll answer back. And when you do, the forest will remember you too.